Competition is an exciting and scary word in the world, but also in wildlife photography specifically. While healthy competition can be thrilling and prompt growth, unhealthy competition can lead to rivalry and disappointment. Today, I have the honor of being joined by Bayou Josh, who is a judge in our upcoming 2022 Bird Burger photo competition that's open and available for you guys to enter. If you're interested in seeing more, check out the website in the description below to see how to enter and how you can win possibly $3,500 worth of prizes. Josh, how are you doing today?
I'm doing awesome. Yeah. I mean, is there like offsides in this competition? Can people like throw a flag or are there like whistles and referees? I don't know.
I mean,
the thing with the photo competition thing has never seemed like a meritocracy to me. You know, like I've seen pictures way down the line in a lot of these competitions and thought, holy smokes, why didn't that win? Right? That is so incredibly cool. And then I'll look at some of the top 5 or 10 and I'm like, I guess that's pretty good. You know what I mean? I don't know. I just never felt like there was a metrics, like a meritocracy. I don't know if that's the word. Like there's a way to measure. Like if you go to apply for a job, you're like, do you have a degree in this? How many years of experience do you have? What kind of, jobs have you done before to qualify you for this? This is like, it's a pretty picture. Top 5 looks good.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm too on the surface about it. Maybe I've got a bad taste in my mouth.
No, I was going to say, I think it's interesting though what you bring up, because it is artistic, right? And it's subjective. It's so subjective, the value of it. But I also think it's interesting that generally, a lot of times, and this is not always, but I think like generally we can, if we take two drastically different ends of the spectrum, right? Like a really good wildlife photography image versus a really bad wildlife photography image. I would argue that if it's a very drastic contrast, 99% of the time, if you ask someone which one is better, they're going to choose the one that's better, right? In a very drastic scenario. So even though artistry is subjective, there seems to be something that collectively, a lot of times people are able to kind of come together and be like, this seems to be better than that one because of this. And maybe not everyone agrees, but there's something about it, and sometimes it feels very intangible, but there's something about it that does feel just a little bit objectively better almost, even though it isn't objective necessarily.
Well, yes. The answer is yes. And I'm going to, full disclosure, I think on Instagram once, my buddy Scott Keys, I don't know if you know Scott, but he had one of those bracket things, and I entered one, and I think maybe twice I've done it, and immediately I was like, I'm not going to win this thing, because I'd look at the other competition and be like, dang, that's pretty freaking amazing. And I don't know, maybe I just don't have the right ego for it or something. I don't know that it's an ego thing or not. I don't know. I like measurables, right? And that's one of the things I love about YouTube is it shows you how many people are watching, and
all the analytics,
shows you how many likes you got, and it gives you like a graph. And then with wildlife photography, it's not like I can say, all right, today I'm going to go out, I'm going to get the most amazing picture of a California quail.
It's very hard to control.
There's a good chance the quail won't participate. The sun won't be where I want it to be. The conditions won't be. So it's just all so, I don't know, the word's not arbitrary, but it's just so you're subject to the environment.
Yeah.
And and then when you put forth all that effort and you don't even get chosen as an honorable mention, and you're like, this is the absolute best I have.
Yeah.
And you look through your images and you're like, well, I guess I got a long way to go. So that kind of strikes your ego, I guess, a little bit. Yeah. So I've just never done it. I've never done it. And mostly because I don't know, you can't give me a scorecard for me to measure it against. And that's just the way my brain works, right? I have to have, what are the measurables? Give me the measurables, let me attack the measurables, and I'll go after it. But art is just so subjective.
Yeah, it is interesting. So I actually judged, for the first time, I judged a competition myself a month ago. And when I was judging that competition, it was me and the other judges. We were looking through the photos, and we were giving them essentially number ratings, right? And at the end, we found out with the host who was hosting it, kind of moderating it all, because we weren't allowed to see each other's scores. We found out which ones were the winners, and generally, so obviously the ones that were the winners, we would agree, like everyone's number scores would be much more higher on those as opposed to others. But also what was interesting was these people who had won these competition, or sorry, that did win this competition that I was judging in. I'd seen them win even previous competitions and other things like that, which is really interesting because it shows that, at least to me, it showed that there was like some interpretation of their work that shows that, like, man, there must be a lot of value in this for some reason, and there must be something to this. So I think that's interesting that you bring that up. But I also like that you bring up that competition can be hard, just constantly kind of comparing yourself to others, possibly, or getting down on yourself because maybe you're not shooting as good of a photograph as the person you're comparing yourself to, or you feel that way, or maybe you aren't able to capture the same cool type of species that you've been wanting to go after. About a year and a half ago, I felt like I was in a rut. So this was not last February, but 2 Februaries ago, a year and a half ago. I felt like I was really in a rut with my images, where I was taking the same image after same image and just kind of dissatisfied with my photography. And lots of it also was because I was just constantly trying to compare myself to others and figure out, like, oh man, I wish I just had this, or I wish I just had that. A lot of that came down to maybe gear, or just like opportunity, or maybe just I hadn't learned enough yet. And so there's definitely a realness to that as well. And I even created a video around it at the time where I was just kind of, it's a silent film called Not a Real Wildlife Photographer, where I was just kind of expressing that that misplaced value and worth in that, I guess. So it's definitely a real struggle, and I like that you bring that up.
You know, you've made the ultimate point, and that is comparison's the thief of joy. Right? I mean, when you find joy in something and then you go and compare yourself to someone else, and inevitably, you know, you're going to find someone that you feel like you don't size up to. And in the way that our world works today, you know, you can be on opposite sides of the planet and you're comparing yourselves to each other. It used to be, you know, you could be the best looking girl in your tribe and there were only 6 other girls, and you didn't know any other
Don't
girls,
know the
right? I
difference,
mean,
yeah.
that's all you knew was your tiny little town of you know, 67 people, and you were one of the 8 girls that were above, you know, 17 years old. But today, it's just massive, the amount of images that we're being flooded with. I mean, I scrolled through Instagram today for like 10 minutes, and you're like, man, one after another of just incredible, mind-blowing, perfect shots.
Mm.
And you're seeing everybody's best. So what happens is inevitably, you know, a little bit of discouragement sets in, and then take it to a next level. On all of these platforms, there's a number next to it, like so many people like this one, and he's only got, you know, 1,000 followers, but he's got 90,000 likes on this image. I mean, so there's like all these other things that just get in our brains about what makes us good or bad at this hobby. And we have to remember, it's a hobby. And the thing that differentiates this hobby from, say, athletic hobbies like fishing, like you could go fishing and Bob could catch no fish, and you could catch 10 fish, and you could be like, dang, I'm a pretty good fisherman. Or you could go play football with your friends, and your team could score, you know, 11 touchdowns and theirs could score 2. You're a better team. But photography, you're out there by yourself, and it's extremely subjective. Like, I feel like this is my best opportunity I've ever had with a great horned owl. But then you look at somebody else who had a much better opportunity where the owl's like flying right at their face with their claws out and, you know, eating a rat right in front of them. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's like, it just, then what, and then you look at that and you're like, oh, I had this amazing opportunity. And then you're like, well, it sucks compared to this guy over in Europe. You know what I mean? It's like he's on another continent.
Yeah.
So that's, for me, that is the biggest warning, and I think emotional pitfall to competitions that don't have, you know, that just don't have like a scorer, really, right? It's just I've warned people against it. And I'm like, look, if you want to get better at photography, look, enjoy, admire what other people are doing, take notes, but take joy and pleasure in what you're doing, and do your absolute very best to just encourage and inspire other people to keep doing their best. But when somebody else does well, be benevolent, be happy for them, be kind about it, and don't kick yourself in the ass because you weren't as good as that.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's a fine line. It's a fine line.
It is a fine line. Yeah.
So are they good? Right? I guess the next question is, are they good?
Yeah, most definitely. I think you brought up a really interesting two things. One being just kind of relating it to like social media and how we are sometimes can define or find ourselves defined by likes, by following numbers, by all these other things, right, that we find our worth in. And those are very dangerous things to find our worth in. I actually wrote out this thing beforehand, knowing we were going to head into this conversation, that I thought would be really cool to share, because I had these kind of thoughts around this. And when I reached out to you wanting to talk about this on a podcast or a conversation, I thought it'd be, super appropriate as we're in this competition season on Bird Burger, right? But I also wanted to talk about the realities of it, but I also didn't want to just leave people. Like, there is a reality to what you said, that comparison can be the thief of joy. There is a reality to that, but I also don't want to leave people in this place of kind of hopelessness, because I think at the end of the day, all of us are going to find ourselves accidentally or intentionally comparing to one another. So yeah, what you were saying along the second point of kind of when there's others that you're watching and you're seeing really good work being done, being benevolent and kind about that, I think is so big, and being able to kind of just appreciate that and appreciate them rather than getting self-absorbed. And so this is a little bit of what I wrote out, and I'd love to just read it out. What I'm really interested in today is not only talking about this dilemma and the realness of it, but also how we can reframe our minds and reshape our culture to find value in the act of gathering together in competition. As I was talking about before in my video I released a while back, I created that video because I found myself in a place of finding all my worth in wildlife photography and the attempt to prove something of myself. I was trying to take better photographs than the ones I saw everywhere else and trying to become the best. My competitive nature had taken advantage of me and controlled my worth, leading to depressing results. I think the easy thing to do in a situation like that is to shove it under the rug, pretend like it doesn't exist, and just avoid others, avoid comparison whatsoever. However, as I walked through that season, the ironic thing was that comparison is also what brought me out of that season of being incontent with my work to being a content person with my work. I learned to reframe my mind to see competition as a motivating factor towards growth, while also learning to solidify my mindset into a place of not finding my worth in my wildlife photography comparison. Slowly, I started to branch out from taking photo after same photo, and I learned to value and take pride in my photography for where I currently am at, and be proud of those accomplishments, yet still allowed myself to compare myself to others to push me towards becoming a better photographer. For example, as I compare myself to some of the best wildlife photographers I follow, Ray Hennessy, Jamin Hunter Taylor, Shaz Jung, or other great wildlife photography YouTubers such as you yourself, that I find myself just constantly admiring and striving to compete with in a certain sense. I find myself learning from them and learning how I can grow in the process. And the truth is, I'm not the best wildlife photographer that I know. To believe that I've already reached the pinnacle of my passion is the end of my journey, not the beginning. So I think there's a reason why it's important to constantly improve. And with wildlife photography, comparing your images with a healthy and stable mindset that doesn't find all your worth invested in your comparison leads to noticing what you can improve in your wildlife photography, and leads to some excitement when you're able to do that with a joyful spirit and compare yourselves to others and be happy for them genuinely at the same time. What a beautiful feeling I think it is to look back at your images and notice the continual progress and improvement month by month. And it's often said that comparison is the thief of joy, as you mentioned, and there is some truth to this, most definitely. But I also think that there is a thief in avoiding competition that can rob you of your chance to learn and grow from someone else in the kindest of ways. true humility isn't valued very much in our culture nowadays, but I believe that with a humble heart, we can all learn from each other and grow together. So that was a lot.
Well said, though. Well said.
You already mentioned some of that stuff, but I think that it's kind of interesting to look at it from kind of both ends of it, where on either way, if you go out of balance, maybe it can be a little bit unhealthy, you know?
Yeah, well, alluding to, a statement you made about observing where you are in your path, right? Your journey as a wildlife photographer. You kind of, you look at picture by picture, okay, I'm getting a little bit better. But once again, if you look out on the peripheral, you see Jammin and you see Ray Hennessy and you see all these other guys that, Ray, all he does, take pictures of birds. That's his life, right? Or you look at, the David Yarrows of the world or whoever you admire. And the fact is, they're spending all their time doing it. And second, they're putting themselves in situations that, a guy like me, maybe once a year, I might get the opportunity to go spend, a week in Alaska or whatever it is. It took me 47 years before I got to that. So
I still haven't gotten
to. Right. But my whole point is
you
summed it up perfectly in saying that your real competition or your real comparison, you have to be careful to narrow down to at least people in your kind of peer group, right? Like if it's the guy that you go take pictures with every day and y'all have the same opportunities every day, and you look at his pictures and you're like, man, he's really doing something better than me, right? What is he doing? And then you can pick his brain, kind of figure out what it is. But it's hard for me to see an incredible picture of a leopard feeding on a hippo or whatever it might be, right? And say, how do I get a better picture of a lion eating on a hippo? You know what I mean? It's like, I'm just not. I'm not going to Africa. So I know that's real scatterbrained, but I feel like when we talk about that thief of joy, we put unreasonable expectations on ourselves. So that's why competition to me is just, there's so many variables out there that, because inevitably we're going to pick an image that has a little bit of wow factor. But that's going to be like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And I'm going to tell you what I always look for and what really sparks my interest is when somebody can take the common and make it amazing. Like, show me a better view of a Canada goose. Show me a better image of a song sparrow. Because it's pretty easy to go out and have amazing opportunities with bald eagles, swooping down, eating salmon or whatever it might be. Those are amazing opportunities, and I don't fault anybody for having them, but you can get really beat up inside your head when you feel like all I see is song sparrows and Canada geese. Right? I said a lot there. Yep. I mean, my mind's all over the place. I love it. But it just goes back to that comparison. We have to be careful how and who we're comparing ourselves to.
One of my, I was so happy and content and proud of the images I was able to get of a fox sparrow in my last adventure, because fox sparrows, at least to me, they feel like kind of drab birds when I'm out and I'm seeing them, like compared to other birds, right? Like they're not super colorful, they're kind of plainish, but I was just so happy because I felt like in those images, I was able to bring a new life and a new kind of light to the way that I saw fox sparrows, because the image felt it was taking a very common situation and making it much more powerful. So I love that you shared that. And I also love that you were sharing about the real competition kind of being with yourself, and maybe other people are kind of like a facet that kind of brings that to life and kind of reveals some of it. But ultimately, I think it comes down to you and your own growth and you striving yourself. And I love that. And kind of brings me to this idea of, I guess, like personal conviction versus imposed convictions. And I don't think by any means imposed convictions is a healthy thing for us as a community to embrace. But I think that personal convictions can be a very healthy thing to embrace. And maybe a little bit of what I mean by that is like, if let's say I'm comparing my photos against yours and I see something really wonderful that you created. And in that process, I'm like, man, that's a good image. I want an image like that. I want an image just like Josh has it. And so I'm going to strive to get a better image that's more like the image that you got. That's a personal conviction that I just implied upon myself. And maybe I even reach out to you and ask you, like, Josh, how did you get this image? I want to know, can you help me to get this image, right? And then we're talking and you're kind of helping me along that process. But an imposed conviction might be something like, let's say I didn't know you hardly at all, and you're just scrolling across my Instagram and we barely ever talked, and you see this image and you're like, oh, that's not that great. And so you decide to DM me like, hey man, this image doesn't look that good because of that. That's not healthy competition, right? And that's something that's not going to be received well. It's just going to get that person down. Like there's no encouragement to that whatsoever. And so I like that kind of that contrast. I think those are two kind of good words for it possibly. And I like how you shared that competition really has to come from, or that drive to do better really has to come from within yourself, and you have to want that, and it shouldn't be imposed on you. And if you're feeling that, that means you've probably lean too heavily into that. Like you've leaned too heavily into comparing yourself to others, and just constantly that's where you're trying to, find all that worth and or maybe prove something that you shouldn't be really trying to prove, because you are just trying to enjoy it at the end of the day. So I love that.
Well, then there's the next question. What do you get out of it then? I mean, so you win a competition, then what does that mean? You're the best photographer of the 50 people that entered? You know what I mean? You're the best photographer. Melissa Grew or whoever it is selects you as one of her favorites. What does that mean? I mean, have you made it?
Those are great points, and I think you're totally right in that that can be a challenging, very fine line to navigate, and something super difficult. I think anyone who knows me personally, right? Like I've talked with you, I've talked with many other wildlife photography YouTubers, many other wildlife photographers, but I think anyone who knows me personally knows that even though I enjoy a good competition, a good thrill, they also know that I am very excited for them, and I am very excited to see them grow and excel no matter where they're at. I mean, a lot of my students that I have in my mentorship programs, I give them feedback weekly. Most of them do the weekly tier, and I give them feedback weekly. And in those feedbacks, I'm very real with them on hey, this could have been better. This could be improved. I liked how you did this, doing both sides of that argument. But ultimately, out of all the students that I've had, probably 19 out of 20 of them have felt very encouraged by my feedback, even when it's very honest and very straightforward, So I think there's a good and healthy way to do that, where we can kind of do that at the same time. We can be honest at the same time that we're being encouraging. I know personally, so I think that's a great question you have, and I think that it does come down a lot to your personality. Like you were even talking about personality traits, like what do I do next after this? For some people, competitions are not the thing that they're going to get excited by and strive for. I know for me personally, I think that there's a lot of excitement in the idea that I guess just the communal activity of who's the best here, even if it is art and even if it is subjective. I love that. There's something about it that gets me really excited. I get excited to see who's gonna win this, who's doing the best here. And so I think that there's something very exciting for me in that. But then also, if I was to win something like that, for me at least, it feels like a good marker in terms of I can look back now and know that I guess I've grown and be proud of all the places that I've been. And so there can definitely be that feeling even for me of what's next, what's going on next. But I think that ultimately, if I'm able to stay kind of present in that moment, I feel a certain type of joy about it. I mean, it's even for the biggest athletes, I forget, there's some psychology name for this, but the biggest athletes in the world that win, the Super Bowl or the NBA
the
finals
complex, I think it is.
Yeah. They all experience that too, but those are actually psychologically very things that are very healthy if you're able to in that moment embrace it, not just hop to the next thing, but just embrace it. They tell people slow down for a while. Do nothing for a little bit, relax and just embrace it, enjoy it, and then move forward a little bit later on. Because if you're just constantly hopping from thing to thing, then you're going to be dissatisfied. And I think that's a lot of where competition too can be very unhealthy, right? You're just hopping from thing to thing and needing to prove yourself and prove that, you're doing better and better or better than others. I had an experience talking about kind of the downside of competition, or when it's unhealthily kind of imposed on someone, where in my local birding and wildlife photography scene, I haven't been that involved in the whole time that I've been doing wildlife photography. And largely it comes down to my initial experience with it, my first year, 2 years trying to do it here in the Fresno area. I tried to get connected to a lot of different clubs, groups, stuff like that. And there was a specific group of older gentlemen, for some reason, did not like me being a part of the scene and the scenario. And even would publicly kind of get to the point where, like, not only like would they personally kind of like outcast me, but publicly they would kind of put me down and make it just really nasty. It just wasn't a community and culture that I wanted to be involved in. And a lot of it, I think, came down to the fact that in the Fresno area, there's not a lot of, like, wildlife photography isn't really a thing. Birding is very much a thing, though. So a lot of people are birders. Very few people are wildlife photographers. And one guy in particular was known as kind of like he was kind of like almost respected as like the king of wildlife photography in this Fresno area, right? And when he saw me coming up with this excitement and this passion to do wildlife photography specifically and not just birding, he started to get a little bit like on edge about that and was like, oh, like, those aren't good photos, and trying to put that down. I think that's a great example of unhealthy competition and very poorly motivated competition. Have you kind of experienced that at all yourself?
You know what's interesting is that photography has migrated, right? It used to be, first of all, only the wealthiest of people could get into it. I say wealthiest. It was people who were privileged enough to own, an expensive lens and could go buy all of the film that you need to make it happen, and you had the time to go out and do it. And I knew someone personally like that. I mean, he was a very good photographer, and a weird kind of attitude set in with him. And he would always talk about how all these digital cameras today, you guys don't know anything about. So, it's the old generation syndrome, right? And I'm guilty of that when I talk to my son about stuff. Oh, you don't know nothing. So it's like it carries on from generation to generation. And it's easier, let's be real. It is easier today than ever to get a good image.
Yeah.
I mean, just everything. I mean, even with auto settings on a camera, you can just make a pretty decent image that you can be proud of. And a lot of times it feels like, and I'm projecting a little bit here, because I've felt this before, that people come along and they're like, oh, well, wait a minute, I've worked, it took me till I was 50 years old to even be able to afford a camera, be able to afford a nice lens, and here comes this kid, and he's got same equipment I have. I've worked my whole life for it. Now he's gonna, you know what I'm saying? And there's like these weird emotions that get involved, and those are real. You have to recognize that, right? I mean, let's be real. You're privileged to be able, at your age, to own the nice equipment that you have. That is a privilege, right? There are people that are in their mid 40s that are trying to figure out how to pay their bills, that can't even think about going out and buying a nice Panasonic camera or whatever you have, right?
Yep.
So I think a lot of those emotions play into it. A lot of that, especially someone who's been doing it their whole life and they see someone come along and get it quick. A little bit of, I don't want to call it jealousy, but kind of, I got to be careful of words I use here.
Yeah.
It's like they're a little disgusted by the whole thing. Like, I've worked my whole life for this, and now
Feels
somebody
unfair.
can go buy a camera at Best Buy that's better than what I've worked my whole life for.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't begrudge someone to be like that, but I have felt the opposite. I went out shooting all the time with a guy who was in his mid 60s, and he was incredibly encouraging. He was incredibly willing to just teach me, and he taught me the most valuable lesson of all, which is subject, background, light. Right. Look at, pick the subject, look at your backgrounds and make sure you got the right lighting on it, and circle around that subject until you find something you like. He said, spend time with the subject. And he would spend incredible amount of time with a cardinal or a sparrow, while other people were trying to take a picture of a bird way up in a tree that was a horrible image.
Yeah.
and he was generous with his time. Yeah, I mean, it can. There's certain people that can come in your life that can turn you on or turn you off to this beautiful hobby, and you have to be careful who you surround yourself with. And it's probably best that you just got away from that dude and went about doing your thing.
Yeah, most definitely. Yep. I think that ultimately, I think a healthy mindset of competition comes down to something like this, maybe of like, I want to do better than you, but not at the expense of you doing better. And I think that that is a really good representation of a motivating factor towards my own personal growth and wanting to become a better photographer, and using competition as a motivating factor towards that, but never as an excuse to put someone down, discourage someone else, make someone feel less than. Yeah, I think that's a kind of good way to sum up the idea of maybe of healthy competition.
Man, what you just said, that was so gracious, by the way. I want to do good, but not at the expense of you doing bad, right? I don't want you to do less so that I can look better.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
I love that. That says more about you than any competition, right? That's your character traits. What I do want to say is that competition can be a wonderful thing if it's done in a way that's encouraging and inspiring.
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to.
Yep.
And unfortunately, a lot of competitions, you submit a photo and you never hear back unless you're in the top, and you don't get feedback. So that's why I agreed to be part of this process. I mean, this is open. We get to discuss it. We get to be encouraging. We get to help people feel motivated in the process as opposed to demotivated.
Yep.
Right. So if I say, if you're going to be in a competition, be eager to receive feedback, be very benevolent and kind towards people who did really well, and be uplifting to people who are really truly seeking to learn and do better.
Yep.
And then there's a whole nother group of people we don't talk about who think they're the best, and they're
yeah, got some
nobody's
work.
going to think it's that good, and they're going to be aggravated about it the whole time.
Yeah,
which that might be me. I mean, I might be that guy. That's why I take my ball and go home. I don't want to be in your competition.
Well, cool. Thank you, Josh. I appreciate that conversation. I think we got to just talk about a lot of really cool, a lot of really deep stuff. Probably the deepest stuff we've talked about so far on this podcast. So it's a fun conversation, and I thoroughly enjoyed getting to have it. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate it, man. Well, you're a good man, Jeremy, and I appreciate you having me on, first of all, but second, giving people the opportunity to enter this friendly competition. And people need to know you put a lot of work into reaching out to people and to getting sponsors for this, and that's not an easy task. So hats off to you for really putting forth a lot of effort, and I hope people appreciate all that you've done. And I know I'll be there excited to see what people have to bring to the table. It's going to be fun.
Yep.
So thank you.
Most definitely. Thank you, Josh. Appreciate it. I hope that today's conversation was an impactful message for you and your wildlife photography journey. As I mentioned before, the 2022 Bird Burger Awards is currently going on, in which you can win up to $1,000 as a prize. If you want to learn more about this competition, click this video here in the end screen to learn more about the categories, prizes, and the event. Make sure to check out Josh's channel below in the description, as he has some amazing content as well. And I'll see you guys in the next episode.